So, in GOTS version 7.0 there is another big section they have added regarding due diligence management process. So, in this criteria they have added different approach, different examples how this can be implemented, but still this is the first time GOTS is introducing this due diligence mechanism in their GOTS requirement. So, in short, I will just try to explain that what are the things that is expected and how the certified entity can implement that one. So, in terms of that, we need to understand that what is basically they have indicated for as a due diligence. So, for the main concept of due diligence is that so the main concept of due diligence is that this is a process to identify, prevent, mitigate and to take action for any actual or potential adverse impact. So, the first thing is that if there is any kind of adverse impact, it could be potential, it could be actual. So, in that case to identify, to mitigate, to prevent and to take action is the main objective of this due diligence. So, how this can be implemented that we will discuss. So, GOTS has adopted 6-step approach for the implementation of this due diligence process. So, we will discuss this one. So, in the first step of the implementation they have clarified that first this due diligence criteria they need to implement or they need to embed or they need to add in their policy management or in their policy. So, whatever the policy they develop, whatever the policy they introduce, in that policy they should embed or they should include the due diligence criteria. So, in the step 2 they have indicated that they should identify the actual or a potential adverse impact. So, first that they have to have a policy, they already have a policy. In that policy they need to include or they need to embed the due diligence criteria. So, now they have a policy, now they have to work on that implementation of that policy. So, for that part first what they need to do, they need to identify all the potential or actual adverse impact. So, that is in step 2 and step 3 whatever the actual or potential adverse impact they have identified, to mitigate or to prevent that adverse impact they need to take action. So, that is the action is in step 3 and in step 4 whatever the action they have taken in step 3, tracking that action is in step 4 and in step 5 whatever the action they have taken and is in step 4 and what is the effectiveness of that action, that they need to communicate with the stakeholders. Stakeholders means whatever the action and whatever the criteria or whatever the adverse impact, who is the relevant stakeholder, they need to communicate with those stakeholders regarding the result. And in the final step they have to take any kind of remedial action or any kind of remediation to ensure that this adverse impact is completely removed or this adverse impact is not repeated or the possibility of repeating this kind of adverse impact is removed. So, these are the 6-step approach that GOTS has included in the GOTS version 7.0 for due diligence management process. So, we will just step by step we will discuss this one. So, in the first step what we have already discussed this kind of thing, that in the first is they already have a policy. So, what they have to do in that policy, they have to adopt or they have to include or they have to embed the due diligence mechanism. So, in that policy if they have the due diligence mechanism, then they can go for the implementation. So, how that can be done? There are some additional clarification that is added. For example, they can if they have a responsible business policy, in that policy they can include all these criteria. If they have a ethical business behavior policy or ethical business strategy, so in that they have include their statement or commitment that is with regard to due diligence management process. So, that is in step 1. And another important thing is that another important criteria is that the due diligence criteria is not only applicable for the certified entity, this is also applicable for the suppliers of the certified entity. So, the first criteria is that the certified entity of GOTS, they should work on the implementation of this due diligence management system for their own. At the same time, they also have to work to implement the same criteria for their suppliers. So these are the steps that we have discussed, and if there is any example, then we can have a case study, so that we can have a case study. So can anyone give one live case or any kind of adverse impact that we are facing frequently? Any example of that one? Maybe for that case we can discuss step by step. Anyone from the participant? Like any kind of, so what we have discussed, that due diligence management process is for any kind of adverse or actual or potential adverse impact. So any example, what kind of actual or potential adverse impact we are facing frequently? Maybe in that case we can discuss with example how we can implement this one, or how a certified entity is supposed to implement that one. Can someone have any example? From participant, from any example for any?
Supplier scope certificate is maybe expired.
Yes, maybe we can. Okay, for our example, we will not say that supplier scope certificate. Maybe we can say that supplier, any kind of license or permit for supplier is expired. Is it okay, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So if it is our example, then how the certified entity is supposed to implement this due diligence management process? So we'll just try to study how this is possible, or how it is expected the certified entity to implement. So if this is a situation, so this is a situation of actual. So we are studying actual adverse impact the certified entity have. So the example situation is that one of the license or one of the permit of a certified entity is expired. So what the certified entity need to do, they supposed to have a policy. If they do not have a policy, then they supposed to develop a policy, and in that policy they need to include all the criteria of this adverse impact. So what could be the criteria? In the policy, how a policy is developed, everything should be there, but in terms of due diligence management process, they need to include all the risk or all the issues that is involved with the expiry of a legal permit. So they have a policy, it could be business policy, it could be legal policy, it could be any kind of policy. So in that policy they need to include that what are the consequences, what are the risks, or what are the situation they might have for having a expired permit or expired license. So that kind of thing they need to include, or they need to embed in their company policy. So that is in step 1. So in step 2, what they need to do, they need to identify. So what are the examples of identification of this kind of thing? Maybe they can conduct a risk assessment. Maybe they could conduct an internal audit. So these are the example of identification, or these are the example of processes or procedure how they can identify the adverse impact. So in step 3, what they need to do, they need to take action. So in our example, the license or permit is expired. So what are the action they can take? They can apply to the concerned authority and they can obtain the legal permit. So that shall be done in step 3. And in step 4, what they can do? They can track. They can track how they have implemented what they have implemented. They can track the result. So they have a expired certificate, expired license or permit. They have renewed it. Now they have to track. What they need to track? Whatever the action they have taken to renew the permit or license, is it working properly or not? So how they can do that one? They can have a procedure of tracking. They can do an internal assessment or internal document review. They can assign the responsibility of any team to check this kind of thing. So this is how they can track the result of what they have implemented. And step 5, what they need to do? They need to communicate with relevant stakeholder. So their permit or license was already expired. So what are the stakeholders, or what are the important stakeholders that is involved with that license or permit? So all those parties should be informed. If it is, if there is any buyer they are working, and in that buyer requirement, if there is anything that the company shall have all valid business permit or any all valid permit, then also that buyer shall be communicated regarding the update or regarding the changes. And in step 6, what they need to do? They need to take remedial action. That means that they have a potential, they have a actual, the example that we are discussing, actual adverse impact. So they need to take remedial action, how this kind of adverse impact can be remediated. So these are the thing, or these are the approach normally GOTS have. So any question from this section, or maybe we can discuss with any other example, or any kind of question from this due diligence. Actually these are a very long criteria. Lot of things are there. A very long guideline is there for the certified entity. So we are just trying to explain it in very short. So if there is any question, we can try to clarify it now.
Based on this question, Anik, for example, the company, the trader company, for example, in UK, and they supply maybe in India, Bangladesh, China, or any other country. Based on the license, company license, legal license, they need to how they can control another country. They may not know the regulation. This is only one example, but I think it's implemented for working hours, like overtime.
Yeah.
I think
Yes.
lots of things.
Yes.
So how we are expecting companies to follow up this due diligence
With their supply chain or with their supplier.
Company, you know, scope certificate required, what required. It's really a big, I think.
No, like in case of GOTS certified, in case of GOTS certified entity as well, this is also a challenging. So all, like, these are the things, still not like everything in this due diligence is not like 100% mandatory to implement. So this is just the initial stage. This is not that in the initial stage GOTS is expecting that the certified entity have their system in place, but 100% implementation of the GOTS due diligence management process is not expectation in the initial time. So whatever we have discussed, so at initial stage it is expected that certified entity must establish a system that they are in process for the implementation of this due diligence management system. So it is not that at initial stage or at the first time they need to implement 100%. So if at least they if at least they have developed their system in place, so that is already acceptable. But yes, as the requirement is already included in the GOTS, gradually it will be mandatory. But at this moment or at initial stage, implementing 100% of due diligence management process is not mandatory. They should have to develop a system. If the system is in place, that is enough for now. So in your like, with regard to your question, if they have established a system, that's and that if that system indicates that they have developed a system to monitor their supplier so that they can work on this due diligence management process, that is enough for initial stage. Like, is there anything more expecting like is there anything you are expecting regarding your question, or it is already clarified?
Yeah, I understand. Thanks. And these days, it is required for even for certified companies, GOTS certified companies.
Even for GOTS certified entities?
Yeah, because if the entity has GOTS certification, that means they have a license, they have followed all the GOTS requirements. So how they identify, how they decided which suppliers should be in this management system, due diligence management system? Is there any criteria? Because this is based on the risk. So do they have to comply this all suppliers or some of them? Is there any risk assessment?
No, like this is like the way it is in GOTS 7.0. They have to communicate their all suppliers. They have to communicate their all suppliers. Now it depends on that how the suppliers would like to implement that kind of thing. But this is applicable for all suppliers, not only for suppliers who is supplying GOTS goods. This is for all suppliers.
Okay. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so these are the things. So these are the documentation requirement at initial stage. So like as I have already discussed that at initial stage, this is like implementing 100% of this due diligence management process is not mandatory. There are the company have to have their system in place at the initial stage. So these are the minimum documentation they shall have in their in their facility to demonstrate that they have established a system. So these are the minimum documentation they shall have. So maybe you can go through and you can raise your question if you have any question, but I can just check the what are the documentation they need. They obviously they should have a policy, and that policy should demonstrate that they have embedded or they have included all the due diligence criteria in their management system. Then they should have a system of conducting risk assessment. Why they need to conduct risk assessment? For that step 2 or identification of actual or potential adverse impact, and then they need to communicate with everyone, like their employees, their stakeholders. They need to communicate. That means that they need to provide training, they need to conduct internal audit. So all this documentation is required to demonstrate that the supplier has established their system. So any kind of question regarding this documentation? Okay, so if no question, then I can go to the next one. So there are few changes that GOTS has made in GOTS version 7.0. The first change is that in GOTS version 6.0, the criteria was that still the requirement is same. The only change they have made in the term. So in GOTS version 6.0, the PFC was there. Now that they have changed the term to PFAC. Only the changes means that the per and polyfluoroalkyl substance, they change the term compound to substance. So PFC to PFAC. So globally for chemical, the substance is more acceptable term than compound. So that is why they have changed the term to PFC to PFAC. So this is the change that they have made, but the requirement is still same, that PFAC is still restricted in GOTS. So the new requirement that they have added, or the new substance that they have added in GOTS version 7.0 as prohibited material, that is quinoline. So what is basically quinoline? Quinoline is basically like if someone has malaria, or if someone have experience of taking lot of antibiotics, so we most of them already know that quinoline is a very effective antibiotic. For human being, it is one of the most effective antibiotic for malaria. But when you are applying the quinoline in the manufacturing facility for production or processing, then quinoline has a like high health hazard. Like some cases, some studies shows that it could be carcinogenic. So that is the reason quinoline is added in GOTS version 7.0 as one of the prohibited substance. Okay, so how, like normally in which processes there is a possibility of use quinoline? So from the term that I have said, it is basically an antibiotic. So from that term we can understand that it could be used in pre-treatment or finishing. In pre-treatment, like in finishing, it could be antimicrobial finishing that can be used, or in pre-treatment if there is any enzymatic things. So in that case also quinoline can be used. So in chemical criteria, they have added, or they have rearranged some requirement in GOTS version 7.0. In GOTS version 6.0, the ammonia treatment was prohibited. So the prohibition is still there. So ammonia treatment is still prohibited, but the thing is that if there is some innovation, there is some new innovation and new machinery, new machine equipment is there, so that can ensure a closed loop system. So, if ammonia treatment is used and the ammonia that is used in the treatment process, that can be like we can extract that ammonia at least 90% from the process, then that ammonia treatment can be allowed. So, this is the exemption that is GOTS has issued in 7.0. So, ammonia treatment is still prohibited, but only in case where the ammonia that is used in the treatment process that can be extracted through a recycling process or through any kind of mechanism, then the ammonia treatment can still be allowed. And for bleaching also same, in GOTS version 6.0 it was said that only oxygen based bleaching was allowed. So, in GOTS version 7.0 the requirement is same, only oxygen based bleaching is allowed, but the same thing, some new machinery and some new innovation shows that the manganese catalyst can still be used for the bleaching purpose. So, GOTS has added an exemption for like manganese catalyst. So, any kind of catalyst that contains manganese that can be used for the bleaching purpose. The only restriction is that the residue limit of manganese should be within 1000 milligram per kg as per ETAD. So, another criteria that GOTS has modified for chemical management, that is that from GOTS version 6.0 we already know that GOTS completely prohibits allergenic and sensitizing substance. So, allergenic substance means that hazard code H334 and sensitizing means hazard code H317. So, that means that any chemical substance that contains this kind of hazard is completely prohibited. The requirement was there in GOTS version 6.0, the requirement is also there in GOTS version 7.0. The only exemption GOTS has allowed in 7.0 is that if the chemical substance is sensitizing, for example dispersed dye, if it is sensitizing, it can be used only if the certified entity who is using this sensitizing substance has implemented all the applicable health and safety criteria that is indicated in GOTS version 7.0. So, these are the changes that is made in GOTS version 7.0. So, under environmental criteria there are a lot of changes. So, in previous environmental management criteria it was quite short. Now, GOTS has like make it more elaborate, more descriptive. So, in the new version of GOTS, they have, in previous version we know that GOTS has said that there must be an responsible person for company's environmental management. Now, they have added another additional criteria and another additional mandatory criteria that there shall be one responsible person, at least one responsible person for chemical management. So, with environmental management, now responsible person for chemical management, now a mandatory criteria for GOTS. Another mandatory criteria that they have added in GOTS version 7.0 is that the environmental management policy that the company have, it shall be appropriate and it shall be applicable as per the company process and operation. And thirdly, the changes that they have made in GOTS version 6.0, the requirement was that the company shall keep the data of energy and water consumption per kg of textile output. The same requirement was there. Now, what they have made, the same thing they have added for waste and discharge. So, these are the changes that is made. Okay. So, sorry. Okay. So, another changes that is made is that in GOTS version 6.0, the requirement was that the company shall have a target goal for energy and water consumption, as well as they shall keep the data for waste and discharge. So, in previous version, the only mandatory requirement was that the certified entity shall keep the data for waste and discharge. In 7.0, now the requirement has become that that data shall be based on per kg of textile output, as well as in previous version the target goal was there only for energy and water, Now the target goal is the company need to set the target goal also for waste and discharge. So these are the major changes that the GOTS has made. Also, the environmental management policy the company is developing, in that environmental management policy there should be included any kind of long or short term project that indicates environmental improvement. And also the company, in previous version there was that the company shall monitor the waste and discharge. Now the company, the requirement is changed to now the company shall monitor and measure the waste toxicity. So now the requirement is not only to measure, the requirement is also to monitor and measure the waste toxicity. So these are the major changes that is made in environmental criteria. There are some other environmental criteria that is added as a mandatory criteria. So first thing is that in previous version there was no in previous criteria there was no mandatory requirement for air pollution or anything. Only the monitoring the GHG emission was the criteria. Now the criteria is added that the periodic monitoring of air emission and air pollution and noise pollution is now mandatory, and the monitoring criteria shall be as per the local law. So this is another mandatory criteria that is added in environmental management policy. And the second criteria is that in GOTS version 6.0 they said that the company shall identify the sources of GHG emitting points. So in previous version only the identifying the source was enough. Now in GOTS version 7.0 the criteria is added that for GHG the company shall identify, monitor, quantify and also set a target goal for improving their GHG emission performance. So all these things they need to do now under GOTS version 7.0. And also there is some additional or recommendation that they have GOTS has added in the implementation manual, that is not a mandatory criteria, but that is a suggestion or recommendation that apart from GOTS, apart from scope 1 GHG emission, for scope 2 and scope 3 also the certified entity shall work to quantify, to measure or to have a target goal. But this is still not a mandatory criteria. All the mandatory criteria for GHG emission as in GOTS version 7.0 is only based on scope 1 GHG emission. So for waste management, they have just clarified that ETP shall be fully operational and it should be fully functional in all time. So this is just an additional clarification that they have added. Also another important point that is added in GOTS version 7.0 is that the person who is responsible for operation of the ETP, they shall have a proper training. So this is a mandatory requirement. The person responsible for operating the ETP, they shall have a, or that person shall have a proper training on wastewater management or operation of the ETP. Okay. So under human rights criteria there are a lot of things that is added and there are a lot of things that is amended. So basic social criteria requirement is still same apart from gender equity. All the criteria that was in GOTS version 6.0 that is still in GOTS version 7.0. Most of the cases the additional clarification is added and some new section is added. So that we will discuss. First thing is that in social criteria they have expanded their scope for the application of GOTS social requirement. So in that scope they have added like vulnerable and migrant workers, like from the vulnerable worker and as an example of vulnerable and migrant worker we can say like pregnant worker, expecting mother, children, migrant workers. So all those workers are added in the GOTS version 7.0 so that the application of the social criteria requirement for GOTS version 7.0 can be equally applied for all vulnerable workers. Also the scope is extended. For in terms of abuse. So in terms of abuse, like any kind of, in previous version it was clarified that any kind of abuse was fully prohibited in GOTS version 6.0. Now they have added in the scope that not only abuse, any kind of activity that is encouraging or that is contributing any kind of abuse, that is also completely prohibited. So, not only abuse, but also any kind of activity that is encouraging or that is contributing to any kind of abuse, that is also prohibited. Okay. So, now if we discuss the criteria for forced labor, the criteria for forced labor is still same, only two additional clarification is added. So, the first clarification is added is that the workers who are working in the facility, they shall not be forced under the means of penalty. Like they shall not have a influence that if they are not obeying or they are not doing anything, then there shall be any kind of penalty. So that is also prohibited in GOTS. So another additional clarification they have added, and that is that the certified entity shall not restrict workers' ability to vulnerability to in their employment. So these are the two things that I will not say that any additional requirement, they have clarified these two things under forced labor. Okay. So under child labor in GOTS version 6.0, the in previous version they have only said that the child labor is prohibited, that the company shall have a policy for child labor remediation. So now they have additionally added, or now they have additionally clarified that how the remediation policy shall be in place. So the requirement for child labor is still there, the requirement is same. The only clarification that they have added, that if there is any children identified in any kind of facility, how they can implement the remediation. So for that part they have added some clarification that the remediation shall be as per the local law requirement, and the child shall be get appropriate remedial action that is indicated in local law or country specific law. And also if a young worker is employed in a facility can still employ young workers, but if a young worker is employed in a facility, then his or her working hours shall be in a way that they are getting enough time for their schooling or for their education. Okay. So under social criteria in discrimination and harassment, there is some additional criteria is added. I will not say additional criteria, I will say some criteria is added as more to make it more stringent. So the first thing is that any kind of discrimination or harassment or violence is prohibited in GOTS, still the requirement is there. Now GOTS is saying that the company shall adopt a zero tolerance policy. If there is any kind of situation of discrimination, harassment and violation, the company shall adopt a zero tolerance policy, zero tolerance in their facility. And another section they have clarified that if there is any kind of situation identified that is related to discrimination, harassment and abuse, then that shall be properly identified, investigated and appropriate action shall be taken. Even in case if it is required, the action of dismissal can also be taken. So the requirement was already there in previous version, that was in very short. Now they have added with some additional clarification and with some more stringent requirement. So under discrimination also they have just clarified that any kind of physical, sexual or verbal harassment or abuse, any kind of this kind of thing shall not be done as a means of disciplinary action. So we are like a certified entity is taking a disciplinary action who is in a fault or who has some issue or who is violating a company policy. Even though in those cases those person or those individual shall not face any kind of discrimination, harassment or abuse or any kind of violence. Okay. And for this kind of discrimination and harassment and abuse, these things shall be properly communicated with all the employees. It could be existing employee, it could be new employee. For all employees that shall be properly communicated. For the new employees who is joining the facility, they shall be properly trained while they are joining the certified entity, as well as this kind of policy and procedure shall be communicated with the existing employees, and that policy and procedure shall be available to everyone of the facility. So these are the clarification that is added in GOTS version 7.0. So this is a new section that is added in GOTS version 7.0 is the gender equity. So in 7.0, GOTS has added some additional importance for gender equity, and they have added some additional this section and some additional clause for gender equity. So in this section, they have mainly focused that for any kind of promotion, reward or recruitment, a certified entity shall not focus on their gender. So they have used some term, one is gender, gender identity and sexual orientation. So these are the terms that they have used. For any kind of recruitment, promotion or reward, the company shall not consider their gender, gender identity and sexual orientation. So this shall not be considered as a criteria for promotion, reward and recruitment. So we all know what is gender and gender identity and sexual orientation, so I am not going to that part. Okay. So another criteria that they have added, that if there is any expected mother in the facility and they are still working in the facility or in the certified entity, they shall be taken with appropriate care for their health and safety. Right. So they have also added some additional criteria for the protection of expected mother. Okay. And also they have in some countries this is also a like law requirement, some countries it is not, but in GOTS version 7.0 they have added this criteria with a mandatory requirement or mandatory criteria, that if there is any pregnant worker or worker who is in maternity leave, they shall not be terminated due to this kind of for taking the maternity leave, or like any kind of adverse action cannot be taken, like for this kind of workers who are in maternity leave or in pregnancy status. So in gender equality, there are some other criteria that is also added in GOTS version 7.0, like if there is a female worker working in a facility, they shall be protected from any kind of harassment or any kind of force thing. For example, if there is a female worker working in a facility, they shall not be forced, or they shall not be they shall not have any kind of threat of dismissal because of their ability or because of their status of their gender. So that is also completely prohibited. Also, there shall not be any kind of condition or there shall not be any kind of action a facility or certified entity can take, that if a female worker is working in a facility, they are not in a situation that is restricting them to become pregnant or become married. So that is also prohibited in GOTS version 7.0. Okay. So for occupational health and safety, all the requirement was there in GOTS version 6.0. It is still there in 7.0. The only thing is that they have added more and more clarity, because in GOTS version 6.0 the requirement was very simple, very short, that the certified entity shall implement all the health and safety measures, but it was very short. But in GOTS version 7.0 they have elaborated and they have explained all the mandatory thing that a facility need to implement for health and safety. For example, in 7.0 they have said that if there is any vulnerable worker, then for those vulnerable worker, the facility shall ensure that they have proper health and safety while they are working. And also for all kind of health and safety, including fire safety, all the safety criteria shall be there. So the fire safety requirement is already there in 6.0, but it is now more clarified. It is added that there shall be sufficient emergency exit. There the exit or evacuation route shall be obstruction free. There shall be a fire alarm system. So all these criteria is more clarified in GOTS version 7.0. And for the training, the additional requirement GOTS has added in 7.0 is that in a facility, what kind of hazard they have, all those hazards shall be shown in a sign form, and those should be in a local language that is understandable by the workers. And the workers who are working on those areas, those shall be trained on those safety signs. So first is that if there is any hazardous situation or hazardous area, that shall be identified with hazard sign with the language that is understandable by the worker, and the worker who is working on those areas that shall be trained on those hazard signs. So this is the new criteria that GOTS has added in 7.0. Okay. So under wages benefit or the remuneration, there is additional requirement GOTS they have added. In previous version, the requirement was that only up to that the facility shall have to calculate the living wages, and they have to calculate the gap of living wage. The requirement was only up to that. Now the requirement is that the facility need to calculate the living wage as well as the living wages gap, and they shall have a proper plan in place to meet the living wages gap. So first is that the previous requirement is already there. Now the requirement is that they shall have a plan or program in place. So how they will meet the living wages gap. Okay. So that also they need to communicate with the respective stakeholders. So how So how they can do that? We'll discuss with some example. So apart from that, GOTS is still encouraging the digital payment for the workers. So the requirement is also there in GOTS version 6.0. The requirement is also in GOTS version 7.0. The GOTS is encouraging the digital payment method. And in any condition, if the worker is paid apart from monthly rate, like for example piece rate or any kind of thing, so in that case also the company shall comply with local law. If there is no local law, then they shall comply with industry benchmark. So these are the thing that is clarified in GOTS version 7.0. In all cases, whatever is stringent, that is that the company need to follow. So now preparing a plan, we can have an example like how the company can prepare a plan to meet the living wages gap. So these are the example, or these are the few steps that a company can do to communicate or to develop a plan to meet the living wages gap. For example, they can, if they have a living wages calculation, they have a living wages gap calculation. So they have all the data from GOTS version 7.0. The additional thing they need to do in GOTS version 7.0 is that they need to communicate with the stakeholders. For example, they can communicate with the buyers if, like, what is their plan, like based on the gap, so how they can meet the living wages. So if it is directly related to the product cost, then they need to communicate the plan with their buyers that this is our plan. If the product cost is impacted or increased in that way, so we can meet the living wages gap. So this communication shall be there. So this should also be a part of the plan for meeting the living wages gap. Then they shall have a, like, the main thing they have added in 7.0 is that the plan or program they have, that shall be authorized by a authorized person. So this is the another important criteria that they have GOTS has added for the living wages calculation and the living wages gap implementation. And the plan the company is making, in that plan the company shall have a step-by-step approach, and they shall set the program in a way that they have an obligation to meet the living wages gap step by step. So if they have a data of living wages gap, then they should have an obligation that within this period of time we will meet this much percentage or this much number of living wages gap within next year or next month or within next 2 years. So any kind of obligation shall be there based on whatever they are planning. So not only the planning that they are making, based on that plan there shall be in any kind of obligation that they will meet that one. Okay. So these are the example how that can be communicated with the stakeholders and how this can be communicated. So for the working hour, the GOTS has like amended this criteria in different way. In GOTS version 6.0, it was that the weekly working hour shall be 48 hours and the rest day shall be 1 day off in a consecutive 7-day period. So in GOTS version 7.0, they have amended this criteria. They have amended that for working hour, in any cases it shall comply with ILO norm or ILO convention, and for weekly rest they have added that in every 7-day period there shall be a continuous 24-hour rest. So, in previous version there was that in every 7 days period on an average they shall have a leave, they shall have an off day. Now they have added the clarity that the off day shall be continuous 24-hour. If the gap, if the leave is continuously 24-hour, then it will be considered as a weekly leave or weekly holiday. So, for quality management or GOTS quality criteria, there are some additional criteria that is added in GOTS. In previous version of GOTS, it was said that for GOTS technical quality parameter and GOTS residues, there are certain criteria that the company need to meet. So, that was in GOTS version 6.0. So, the same thing is there, only some testing method, some parameter is changed. Apart from that, some additional criteria is added in GOTS version 7.0, and that is that the company or a certified entity for under GOTS version 7.0, they shall have a quality manual, a documented quality manual. What shall be included? The documented quality manual may include lot of things, but what are the mandatory criteria that quality manual shall include? That shall include all the criteria that is required for the certified entity to comply with all the technical quality parameters that is indicated and all the residues that is indicated in GOTS version 7.0. So, the first mandatory criteria is that there shall be a quality manual, and in that quality manual shall include all the requirements or all the procedure or all the criteria that is required for the facility to comply with the residual as well as the technical quality parameter that is indicated in GOTS version 7.0. Okay. So, these are this is the new criteria GOTS has added in quality management criteria. And another thing GOTS has added is that the testing of GOTS product is not only applicable, the quality manual that is developed for the testing requirement, in that it is not only applicable for the final goods, that can also be applied for input, in process and output products. So, for the technical quality or quality requirement as per the quality manual that the certified entity is developing, so that shall not only apply for the finished product, that can also be applied for the input, in process and finished goods. Also, for meeting the GOTS quality criteria and the customer requirement, there shall be a complaint mechanism for the quality requirement. So, if there is any complaint from customer for the product quality, then for that company shall have a policy, the company shall have a procedure for taking appropriate remedial action to meet the quality criteria. So, this is the criteria GOTS has added in 7.0. Also, there are some minor changes GOTS has made in 7.0, that some testing criteria, testing method as well as some limit values of residues that is changed in GOTS version 7.0. So, like for example, the aniline free term that was previously in GOTS version 6.0, the aniline free indicates that it is below 100 milligram per kg. Now, they have changed the limit value to 100 to 20 milligram per kg. So, there are some minor changes in the testing method and residual limit that is indicated in GOTS version 7.0. These are the few examples. There are some other changes as well. So, in GOTS version 7.0, in the standard there is no mandatory criteria for the GOTS care label or GOTS care instruction. But in the implementation manual, GOTS has included a mandatory criteria under GOTS version 7.0, is that if there is any applicable environmental friendly instruction applies to the GOTS goods, that shall be included in the care label. Like for example, whenever possible, whatever the instruction that have less environmental impact or that can contribute to the environment, that kind of instruction shall be included whenever applicable in the GOTS care label. The some example that they have added in GOTS version 7.0 is that, for example, dry in normal temperature instead of tumble dry or washing machine dry, use of liquid detergent instead of like powder detergent. So this kind of applicable environmental friendly instruction shall be included in GOTS care label. Also there is some recommendation that is added. This is not a mandatory criteria, but just a recommendation is that GOTS shall include the end life option. Like if a user is using a GOTS product, then it is recommended that the certified entity inform the end user that what could be the end life option of that product. For example, everything we cannot recycle, everything we cannot reuse. So what are the end life options for that GOTS product that shall be recommended to the end user? Like if anyone is purchasing a GOTS shirt, then that user it is recommended to share that this shirt can be reused or this shirt can be recycled. So this kind of end life instruction can be provided to the end user. Okay. So another additional clarification GOTS has added in GOTS version 7.0 is that this is just for the instruction. Some cases it is found that whenever a GOTS product is tested for residues, then only the main product shall be considered for the residual testing. If a product contains different kind of accessories or different kind of decorative trims, then all those shall be excluded from the residual testing. GOTS residual testing of final product shall be done only on the GOTS goods, not for all accessories, not including all accessories or trims. And if the sample is sent to a laboratory for this kind of testing, that laboratory shall be instructed in the same way that the product shall be tested only for the main product, not including all kind of accessories and everything. Okay. So this there is some additional instruction that is added, although we do not have any kind of GOTS certified entity for personal care product. Just to know that there is some additional requirement GOTS has added for personal care product. One is that if there is any kind of barrier or film is used in any kind of product where it is required. Now in GOTS material composition, virgin polyurethane is not acceptable, but still we can use virgin polyurethane as a barrier for some kind of personal care product where there is no alternative. For example, baby diaper, for example, sanitary napkin. So in this kind of material, virgin polyurethane can be used only as a purpose of barrier, and only if it is not coming direct contact with the skin. So only in those cases for personal care product, this barrier film is allowed. And for tampon, like 100% organic cotton fiber is allowed. Like in tampon, if it is like for security veil, what kind of material that is used, if it is 100% organic cotton, then only it is allowed. Under the final section of GOTS version 7.0, in the definition, they have added some additional definition, and they have added some additional clarity in the definition. For example, in microplastic, they have added some clarification. In GOTS version 6.0, the only clarification was that the dimension of the microplastic was there. Now in 7.0, for the term microplastic, they have added dimension as well as length of polymer. Also, in GOTS version 7.0, some additional definition is added for mulesing. That is already there, all we know. And from the environmental part, we already know that GOTS mandatory requirement is only focused based on GOTS scope 1 requirement, GHG scope 1 requirement, and GHG scope 2 and scope 3 is still an recommendation, it is not a mandatory requirement. For clarification, GOTS has added some additional clarity what is meant by GHG scope 1, GHG scope 2 and scope 3. So these are the additional clarification GOTS has added in the requirement. So if anyone has any question or if anyone require any clarification, we can clarify and we can discuss.
So need to know about decorative accessories. You said they use a special term, decorative accessories. So 15% of accessories will be only considered when they use decorative accessories.
Decorative accessories.
So like normal accessories, button, zipper,
These are not considered as a decorative accessories.
As we consider
Decorative accessories means that there are accessories that is used only for the purpose of decoration. Accessories that is used for the functional purpose is not considered under this criteria.
Okay.
This is only decorative accessories, not functional accessories. So, any question from anyone? So, any question or any clarification?
Sir, I have a question. Sir, in your session you told about ammonium chloride. We all know
Ammonium chloride, not ammonium chloride, ammonia.
fertilizer.
Ammonia, not ammonia fertilizer, ammonia.
Okay, sir. We all know about this is that is very hazardous for us. So what will be the tracking process? How much ammonia was used in the product?
We can discuss separately because this is not a part of course version 7.0, but ammonia is used for the treatment in specifically in case of mercerization it can be used.